Number 5. Eiffel Tower. Paris, France. The Eiffel Tower was erected in 1889. It is now the symbol of the city of Paris. Its history is very interesting. Its construction has caused a few worries to its creator, Gustave Eiffel. Its design was innovative and different from the architecture of the time, which is why it wasn't even supposed to remain. It was a temporary construction that was to stay only 20 years. But its revolutionary architectural style changed its fate. Now, approximately 7 million visitors climb the Eiffel Tower every year. Now, you're going to learn about when the Eiffel Tower was built and how long it took, who built the Eiffel Tower, why they built it, and if it was indeed as beloved back then as it is now. The construction time of the Eiffel Tower is actually quite impressive. The first digging work started on January 28, 1887. On March 31, 1889, the tower had been finished in record time. It only took a total of 2 years, 2 months and 5 days to construct. But who decided to place this giant object in the middle of the city? The Eiffel Tower was named after Gustave Eiffel, whose company was in charge of the project. Gustave Eiffel was not, however, the primary designer of the famous iron structure. Eiffel had the help of engineers that worked for him in the Compagnie des Établissements Eiffel, Maurice Coquelin, Émile Naugier, and architect Stephen Sylvester. In recognition of the engineers, scientists and mathematicians who contributed to the construction of the tower, the names of these persons were engraved on the side of tower. 72 names, to be exact. Number 4. The Sistine Chapel. Vatican City. Sistine Chapel, papal chapel in the Vatican Palace that was erected in 1473–81 by the architect Giovanni de' Dossi for Pope Sixtus IV, hence its name. It is famous for its Renaissance frescoes by Michelangelo. The Sistine Chapel is a rectangular brick building with 6 arched windows on each of the 2 main, or side, walls and a barrel-vaulted ceiling. The chapel's exterior is drab and unadorned, but its interior walls and ceiling are decorated with frescoes by many Florentine Renaissance masters. The frescoes on the side walls of the chapel were painted from 1481 to 1483. On the north wall are 6 frescoes depicting events from the life of Christ as painted by Perugino, Pinturicchio, Sandro Botticelli, Domenico Ghirlandaio, and Cosimo Rosselli. On the south wall are 6 other frescoes depicting events from the life of Moses by Perugino, Pinturicchio, Botticelli, Domenico, and Benedetto Ghirlandaio, Rosselli, Luca Signorelli, and Bartolomeo della Gatta. Above these works, smaller frescoes between the windows depict various popes. For great ceremonial occasions the lowest portions of the side walls were covered with a series of tapestries depicting events from the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. These were designed by Raphael and woven in 1515–19 at Brussels. The most important artworks in the chapel are the frescoes by Michelangelo on the ceiling and on the west wall behind the altar. The frescoes on the ceiling, collectively known as the Sistine Ceiling, were commissioned by Pope Julius II in 1508 and were painted by Michelangelo in the years from 1508 to 1512. They depict incidents and personages from the Old Testament. The Last Judgment fresco on the west wall was painted by Michelangelo for Pope Paul III in the period from 1534 to 1541. These 2 gigantic frescoes are among the greatest achievements of Western painting. A 10-year-long cleaning and restoration of the Sistine Ceiling completed in 1989 removed several centuries' accumulation of dirt, smoke, and varnish. Cleaning and restoration of the Last Judgment was completed in 1994. Number 3. The Flatiron Building. New York City, USA. The wedge-shaped Flatiron Building is one of the best-known and most beloved symbols of New York City. When TV shows and movies need to establish that their proceedings are based in Manhattan, a shot of the 22-story triangular structure is de rigueur. In the Spider-Man movies, Peter Parker's employer, the Daily Bugle, is located here. The building was designated a New York City landmark in 1966, added to the National Register of Historic Places 13 years later, and decreed a National Historic Landmark in 1989, and of course, an entire neighborhood was named after it. Yet when the Flatiron Building was unveiled in June 1902, it was greeted by a fair amount of derision. The New York Times labeled it a monstrosity, and many worried that its three-sided structure, little more than 6 feet wide at its front, would be knocked down by strong gusts of wind. Sculptor William Ordway Partridge, whose works include the Pietà at St. Patrick's Cathedral, went so far as to dub the building a disgrace to our city, an outrage to our sense of the artistic, and a menace to life. Architect Daniel Burnham opted for the triangular shape to maximize the building's footprint on the triangular parcel of land set amid Fifth Avenue, Broadway, and 22nd and 23rd Streets. At the time, the scrap of land itself was known as the Flatiron. The building being erected on it was called the Fuller Building, as it was intended to be the headquarters of the Fuller Company, a construction firm. 10 years earlier, building the 285-foot-high structure in New York would have been, if not impossible, then highly unfeasible. Steel skeletons are what allowed tall buildings to be built safely and affordably, but until 1892, the city required buildings to include masonry in its structure. Not only was the Flatiron Building one of New York's first skyscrapers, it was also the first steel skeleton structure whose construction was visible to the public. The structural engineers reinforced the frame to ensure that the slender building would withstand any gusts in what was already a bit of a wind tunnel. All the same, the relative speed with which the building was erected once the foundation was completed, the structure proceeded at a rate of a floor a week, probably did not assuage the fears of those observing the construction. Nonetheless, once the building was completed, and despite the carping of numerous critics, the public took pride in what was the first skyscraper north of 14th Street. Photographers Alfred Stieglitz and Edward Steichen and artists Child Hassam and Albert Gleizes are among those who created works in homage to the Flatiron. While its shape was the building's original talking point, its Renaissance-inspired Beaux Arts facade was worthy of attention too. Made of limestone and glazed terracotta, it features columns, medallions, balustrades, friezes, and along the 22nd floor, gargoyles. One thing the building did not originally have were bathrooms for women. No doubt Fuller Company did not expect women to frequent its headquarters. To accommodate female visitors, management eventually designated the bathrooms on the odd-number floors for women, with those on the even-number floors reserved for men. Fuller Company occupied the 19th floor of the building only until 1910, eventually moving uptown to the structure on 57th Street that now bears the Flatiron's intended name, the Fuller Building. Other tenants throughout the Flatiron Building's history included the Imperial Russian Consulate, the Murder Incorporated Crime Syndicate, and Tavern Louie, one of the first restaurants catering to whites to hire an African-American jazz band, Louis Mitchell and the Southern Symphony Quintet, to perform. St. Martin's Press and other imprints of Macmillan Publishing Company are among the current tenants. Number 2. São Paulo Museum of Art. São Paulo, Brazil. The São Paulo Museum of Art is an art museum located on Paulista Avenue in the city of São Paulo, Brazil. It is well known for its headquarters, a 1968 concrete and glass structure designed by Lina Bo Bardi, whose main body is supported by two lateral beams over a 74 meters, 243 feet, freestanding space, considered a landmark of the city and a main symbol of modern Brazilian architecture. The museum is a private non-profit institution founded in 1947 by Assis Chateaubriand and Pietro Maria Bardi. MASP distinguished itself for many important initiatives concerning musology and art education in Brazil, as well as for its pioneering role as a cultural center. It was also the first Brazilian museum interested in post-World War II art. The museum is number 1. Leaning Tower of Pisa. Pisa, Italy. The construction of the Leaning Tower of Pisa began in August 1173. It was interrupted several times by wars, debt, and while engineers worked on solutions to correct the lean. We now know that without these interruptions that allowed the soil to compress under the tower, it would have certainly toppled over. Pisa Tower was eventually completed in the mid-1300s. The Tower of Pisa is the church's bell tower. The city of Pisa was at the beginning a simple but important Italian seaport. With its growth, so did its religious buildings. Its fame and power grew gradually over the years, as the people of Pisa were involved in various military conflicts and trade agreements. The Pisans attacked the city of Palermo on the island of Sicily in 1063. The attack was successful and the conquerors returned to Pisa with a great deal of treasure. To show the world just how important the city was, the people of Pisa decided to build a great cathedral complex, the Field of Miracles. The plan included a cathedral, a baptistry, a bell tower, the Tower of Pisa, and a cemetery. The real identity of Tower of Pisa's architects is a mystery. The most accredited architects of this first phase of work are Bonanno Pisano and Guardo d'Enguardo. The second phase of construction started in 1275, and the work is attributed to Giovanni di Simone. Tommaso Pisano, 1350–1372, was the architect who finished the work. The leaning of the Tower of Pisa comes into the story in 1173, when construction began. Thanks to the soft ground, it had begun to lean by the time its builders got to the third story, in 1178. Shifting soil had destabilized the tower's foundations. Over the next 800 years, it became clear the 55-meter tower wasn't just leaning but was actually falling at a rate of 1 to 2 millimeters per year. Today, the leaning Tower of Pisa is more than 5 meters off perpendicular. Its architect and engineer tried to correct this by making the remaining stories shorter on the uphill side, but to no avail. It kept leaning more and more. The lean, first noted when 3 of the tower's 8 stories had been built, resulted from the foundation stones being laid on soft ground consisting of clay, fine sand and shells. The next stories were built slightly taller on the short side of the tower in an attempt to compensate for the lean. However, the weight of the extra floors caused the edifice to sink further and lean more.